Merry meet, my fellow bookish witches. Welcome to Witchy Reads, a place where we talk about books and other bookish things. Well, the weather is changing, the days are getting longer and hotter, and I can no longer comfortably wear a hoodie on most days. That means it's time to do a fond farewell to winter by doing a reading wrap-up of the books I read this past winter season. If you happen to watch my Cozy Yule TBR, you'll know some of the books that I selected for this past winter season that I wanted to read. Since posting that video, I actually ended up adding and reading a few more books than I originally planned. Some were added because of my book club. I have no say in what is going to be picked for the book club month to month unless it is my month to pick. So I had to include those books in the time frame that I was reading. I believe from the time that I recorded my Cozy Yule TBR to now was about 3 to 4 months. If that's the case, combining December and January for book club, I believe there would have been an additional about 3 books to my reading list. And of course, other books got added because I have ADHD, especially when it comes to books, and I couldn't help myself. There were books that came up that I saw either online or were recommended to me, and I just decided to purchase them and read them. We are going to see just how much that affected my TBR aspirations and what I managed to accomplish in my reading all winter long. So without further ado, let's get into the books. I'm gonna go ahead and do the books in order from when I read them. First up, we have The Woman in Me by Britney Spears. This was one of the nonfiction books that I read last year, and I included it in my Cozy Yule TBR, primarily because when I made that list, I was already reading it, so I just chose to include it because it was just easier. I did do a full-length video review of this book along with I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jeanette McCurdy. The video I affectionately call the narcissistic parent video. You should check it out if you haven't already. There's really not much more I want to say about this book that I didn't already cover in that video. Suffice to say, I did enjoy the book aside from some minor tweaks that I would have done as far as editing goes, but any improvements to the book would have been ever so slight. For that reason, I did give it a rating of 4 stars. The next book I read was one of those book club selections, and I believe when I recorded my Cozy Yule TBR, it was the book club selection at that time. It is Some Things I Still Can't Tell You by Misha Collins. This was the only book of poems that I read last year, and in fact is the only book of poems I've read in a long while. I'm sure many people know who Misha Collins is. If you're not aware of Supernatural, he is an actor on that very popular show. He is also a writer and humanitarian. He does some great work with charities. One of those is Gishwish, which is something I did participate in years ago. He is a big philanthropist and, gives back to the community in a lot of different ways. Most people do know him as Castiel, the angel from Supernatural. If I'm being honest, that is the first place that I was introduced to him. I guess it was a couple years back, he wrote this little book of poems. Supposedly poems have always been like a big thing for him. One of my friends in the book club decided to pick that book for her pick last year. I definitely saw the passion in his writing, although I do think a couple more rounds of edits would have improved it greatly. But I get it. I could see no one really wanting to be that editor who corrects a famous person's book of poems. Ultimately, we ended up with this okay-ish book. It was also how I found out that Misha Collins divorced his wife. As you can tell, I am definitely not a fanatic when it comes to being in the Supernatural fandom, so that little bit of information was actually a surprise for me, and I really didn't expect to learn it while reading a book of poems. In the end, though, I ultimately gave it a rating of 3 stars. It wasn't necessarily bad, it wasn't necessarily good, it was very middle of the road for me. Next, we have 2 books, and I'm doing these together because they were included in a full-length video review together. What Wild Women Do by Karma Brown and Weyward by Emilia Hart. Both of these books were a part of my Cozy Yule TBR list, and of the 2, I really enjoyed What Wild Women Do, especially listening to the audiobook, which I highly recommend if you plan on reading this. Weyward was a completely different experience for me. I did not like it, and I wished it had done so many things differently. I rated What Wild Women Do 5 stars, and I rated Weyward 2 stars. Now we come upon my first ADHD addition to this list. I decided on a whim to pick up Into Thin Air, a personal account of the Mount Everest disaster by Jon Krakauer. At some point between December and January, I randomly found myself falling down this weird internet rabbit hole about Mount Everest disasters. It kind of started when I watched the movie Everest that I believe was made in 2015, which is an adaptation of this novel, a first-person account of the 1996 Mount Everest disaster. I'm not sure how many people know about that disaster. There were lots of bad choices made. It was primarily a man versus nature thing, and in that instance, nature always wins. A lot of tragic deaths happened that shouldn't have happened. Strangely, this is the second time that I've read this book, the first being when I was in high school, but I honestly could not remember anything about this book before my recent read. I attribute this to now knowing as an adult that I do much better with nonfiction books in an audio format. So that's what I did for this most recent read. This book is particularly dark as it deals with a lot of people dying while facing nature. It also briefly dips into the commercialization of climbing Everest, which in my opinion exacerbated the 1996 disaster. I personally have never really seen the appeal of climbing a mountain that can easily kill you. But I won't lie, this story is very intriguing. And since the book's release, new information has come out regarding the tragedy and the timeline as far as what went down. So surprisingly, the movie adaptation portrays more accurate information than this book. But the book is still good, especially if you want to understand what happened from the point of view of someone who was actually there. I rated it 4 stars. My next read was Bookshops Bonedust by Travis Baldree. If you've been following me for a while, you'll know that I adore this world in Bookshops Bonedust, as well as the first book of Legends and Lattes. It's a cozy D&D story and was a great addition to my Cozy Yule TBR. This just also happened to be my first read of 2024. I definitely love that I started this year strong. I love the world created by Baldree in this book as well as Legends and Lattes. I've talked about both of these books a lot, and I will probably continue to do so for a while. I love them. Bookshops Bonedust is a prequel to the first book, Legends and Lattes. We follow a younger version of the woman main character, Viv, who is a barbarian orc waylaid in a tiny town while recovering from an injury. It does a fantastic job of planting those seeds of what leads her down her life path that ends at Legends and Lattes. I highly recommend both of these books if you enjoy the world of D&D but cozy. I rated it 5 stars. Next, we have Hound Witch by Jamie Waters. This was one of my ARC requests. So again, another random addition that was not part of my original TBR list. It was a short witchy story that had some dark elements, but I wouldn't necessarily classify it as horror. The book is only 86 pages, but manages to pack a complete story within it, and I appreciate that. I liked the woman main character, Lainey, both in the present time and in the flashbacks that the story provides. I think the dynamic of her using her witch powers to assist her high school bully as adults is a fascinating one. I only wish that they had provided more information about the dark entity because I was super intrigued and wanted to learn more. I ultimately ended up rating it 4 stars. Next, we have The Penance of Valentine by Rebecca Rook. This is also another book that I did a full-length video review for, so if you want to go check that out, please do so. This was also an ARC request, and I believe came after I requested Red Hound Witch. This one was a little bit longer, coming in at 245 pages, so it did create kind of a dent in my TBR list. It's a great story about life, death, and second chances. The woman main character, Valentine, navigates the darkly whimsical world of the afterlife as she completes a penance with the hope of returning to her life on Earth. While there were a few narrative choices that I wasn't particularly fond of, I did enjoy this book, and I thought it was a great debut novel. I rated it 4 stars. The next book I read was Iron Widow by Zoran J. Zhao. This was my book club selection for the months of December and January. We usually end up combining those 2 months just because of holidays and obligations. It makes it a lot easier for the group to read a book and get it completed, and we don't feel rushed. It also is a perfect time, whoever ends up getting that 2-month block, to pick a bit of a thicker book. I wouldn't say Iron Widow is super thick, but it's up there. It's about 400 pages, a little less. I also did a full-length video review, so please go and watch that if you are amiable. I talk about the themes of female rage that seem to be prickling other readers of this book. Now, I'm not a staunch supporter of this book. There are some narrative weaknesses that I wish had been fixed, and I don't think will likely be fixed as the series continues. All in all, I did enjoy the read, and I will say it again, I feel the woman main character is justified in all the rage and bloodshed that she partakes in. I rated it 4 stars. Next, we have The Bear and the Nightingale by Catherine Arden. This was the book that made me decide to do a cozy theme for my Yule TBR. I hate to admit it though, I didn't like this book as much as I hoped I would. The first half of the book dragged so much, and the main story really didn't start until about 46% of the way into the book. Quite honestly, I am surprised at myself and a little proud of myself that I managed to not DNF this, with how far along it took for the story to really kick in. The book itself was a bit of a drag. It took me way longer to finish this than any of the other books that I'm going to mention. I know I made an affirmation for the new year to finish any series that I start. Since this is a first of a series, it qualifies. I hate to say it, but I'm going to have to tap out of this series. I just don't have the interest I thought I would in completing it. So while I did finish The Bear and the Nightingale and rated it 3.5 stars, I think I'm just going to have to DNF the series. Sorry. Now we're gonna get into the romance books that I read this winter season. First being This Spells Love by Kate Robb, and the second, Kiss Her Once for Me by Allison Cochran. And again, I'm mentioning these books together not only because they are the romance books that I read this winter season, but because I also did a full-length video review for both of them together. You can watch my video for a more in-depth talk about these books. I also dive a little bit into the narrative device that is the third act breakup, because romance novels tend to utilize that more than any other genre. Of the two, I did enjoy This Spells Love more. This primarily had to do with the friends to lovers trope, as well as having a bit of a witchy storyline, which is always something I tend to enjoy. This isn't meant to cast a shadow over Kiss Her Once for Me. I thought it was a cute queer holiday romance, but really nothing more. It is very stereotypical, very run-of-the-mill rom-com romance. Nothing wrong with that. If that is something you were in the mood for, I highly recommend this one. I think you will enjoy it. I just felt that This Spells Love was a little different than the typical rom-com story, and I liked the magical witchiness that was incorporated. I rated This Spells Love 5 stars and Kiss Her Once for Me 3.5 stars. Next, we have my book club's February selection, How to Kill Men and Get Away with It by Katie Brent. This is my most recently published long-form video review. I very much feel this book was marketed incorrectly as a dark comedy. I go into depth about why that is in my video. I was hoping that I would find this book humorous in a darkly sarcastic kind of way, but ended up not really enjoying it very much. I have yet to really find a novel in the dark comedy genre that I really enjoyed. I'm still holding out hope that I can find one that is a dark comedy that will hit all the right notes for me. In the meantime, though, I rated this book 2.5 stars. And then the next book I read was The Ocean at the End of the Lane by Neil Gaiman. This book was also picked for my Cozy Yule TBR. It has been sitting on my shelf since 2013, so I was really excited to pick this up and read it, considering that Neil Gaiman is also one of my favorite authors. It is a dark, whimsical novella that actually surprised me by including some witchy characters, specifically the 3 Hemstock women that are mentioned in the book. They definitely represent the triple goddess of Mother, Maiden, and Crone. If you're a witch, then you know what I'm talking about. And it's very clear that that is what they represent. I don't know if Gaiman has ever come forward about confirming that little tidbit, but it definitely felt that way for me. I do think if you enjoyed Gaiman's Coraline, you will probably like this one as well, though I would say it's not as fun as Coraline. I think the subject matter is a lot darker, even though children are involved, so just be aware of that. I like that the ending was kind of a non-ending, if you understand what I mean. It provided a way for the story to maintain a magic aura about it. This isn't my favorite Gaiman book, but it's definitely on par for what you can expect from him. I rated it 3.5 stars. Now, I will say that there were 2 more non-fiction books that I read on audiobook. Both dealt with the same subject matter, and I intend to make a long-form video review covering both. This is why I've decided that I don't really want to give away what those books are or really talk about them in depth on this video. I will just leave you with this. These books dealt with the wild acquisition of Twitter. I guess this would be the point of the video to talk about the stats for this last reading period. This was something that I went back and forth with on if I wanted to incorporate this in any of my, wrap-up videos. So while I don't have extensive stat information for this round, I have been thinking about adding some stat information during the next round. So this upcoming TBR list, upcoming reading, quarter, since that is how I am doing this. I have an account on Storygraph now. Once I get everything organized and transferred over to that account, I plan on utilizing its stats feature to the fullest. Until then, though, I can give some very basic stats for this past winter season reading period. Here we go. I read 16 books, 5 audiobooks, 5 ebooks, and 6 physical books, totaling 3,163 pages in physical and ebooks, and 41 hours, 54 minutes in audiobooks. One of the books was taken out from the library, while the rest were either purchased or ARC requests. I hope as I read more books that the number of books that I borrow from the library will increase. I know I'm a book dragon, but I want to support libraries as much as possible. And there you have it. Woo! All the books I read this past winter. If you have seen my Cozy Yule TBR, you'll already know I just couldn't manage to finish every book that I listed. My plan is to effectively institute a rollover policy, in that when I pull the books for my next TBR list, those books that I wasn't able to finish during the winter season will automatically be included in the new reading quarter. I will go into into more detail on those books in my TBR selection video, which should be coming soon after this one. If you've read any of the books that I read this past winter season and you would like to share your opinion on them, please feel free to do so in the comments down below. I would love to continue discussing them beyond this video if others are interested. If you enjoy my videos and want to support my channel, the best way to do that right now is to like this video, subscribe to my channel, and share any videos that you particularly like. It really is a huge help and I greatly appreciate it. Until our next chapter together, merry part and blessed be.